Guys, this is a very heartbreaking story of how a couple and their 3 children were poisoned to death just some weeks after someone threatened to wipe out their entire family in a village meeting. So on Friday, the 29th of August 2025, in a community called Akpani Neke in Isi-Uzo local government area of Enugu state, a man identified as Barnabas Ikechukwu Ikezie, his wife Angela Ikezie, and their 4 children, Marvellous, Divine, Gift, and Victor, all had their dinner as a family before retiring to bed that night. However, when they woke up on Saturday morning, every member of the family who had eaten dinner the previous night began complaining of severe stomach cramps. When it became clear that what the family of 5 was going through was not something that would be resolved by just watching and waiting, the neighbors and relatives decided to rush them to the hospital for emergency treatment. Unfortunately, there was no functional hospital in the community where the family resided, so they had to rush them to Faithland Clinic, a hospital in a neighboring community in Ikem, which is the headquarters of Isi-Uzo local government area. Sadly, while on their way to Faithland Clinic, one of the children, identified as Divine, tragically passed away. Then, when they finally got to the hospital, the couple's only daughter, named Gift, also gave up the ghost. This left behind just the parents, the first son, Marvellous, and the last child, Victor. Now, this is where the story began to take a very fascinating turn. Mr. Barnabas's brother, identified as Pastor Ignatius Ikezie, who went for a conference in Abuja, returned that same Saturday to hear of the misfortune that had befallen his brother's family. Pastor Ignatius went to the hospital the next day, which was Sunday, to visit his brother and his family. When he arrived at the hospital, he was shown the corpse of the 2 deceased children at the mortuary, as well as his brother and his only surviving family. According to Pastor Ignatius, when he saw his brother Barnabas, he was recovering. The remaining 2 children were also recovering. The wife, even though she was on oxygen, was also recovering and could respond to greetings. The pastor said they all chatted together for a while, during which his brother told him that he was hungry. Pastor Ignatius then went out to get food for all of them, and when he returned, they all ate to their fill. Then in the evening, Pastor Ignatius decided to go somewhere. He left the recovering family under the watch of one of his sisters, and that was when something interesting happened. When Pastor Ignatius returned later that evening, his sister narrated a story to him about her encounter with the man who was alleged to have been responsible for their brother's family's condition. According to the sister, when they were having their clan meeting just a week before the incident, the suspect, whose identity has been kept hidden for now, openly vowed to deal with their brother, Barnabas. The suspect was said to have made the vow after a case was raised during the meeting, and Barnabas spoke the truth regarding that particular case. This encounter was said to have made the suspect see Barnabas as a threat, which he openly swore to eliminate. Now, this suspect was not a stranger to the family. In the past, Barnabas's family had been involved in a land dispute with him, and after the matter was presented before the entire community, it was ruled in favor of Barnabas's family. However, after the land dispute victory, the suspect had been vowing to wipe out their entire family. Now, the interesting part is that while Pastor Ignatius had gone out that evening, this said suspect was alleged to have traveled all the way from their village to the hospital, which was in a neighboring community, just to confirm if the family was dead. According to the sister, when the suspect arrived at the hospital, he stood at the entrance of the ward and then discussed with the nurse. After the discussion, the nurse allegedly called her with the sole intention of distracting her, but she refused to leave the ward. Seeing that things were not going as planned, the suspect, who was in the company of another young man, then went away with the nurse. On hearing this, Pastor Ignatius decided to stay in the hospital till the next morning so that he could take his brother and his family out of the facility. However, the crazy events that would take place in the next couple of hours would turn out to be the type that would see Pastor Ignatius' world come crashing down. On that Sunday night, the pastor slept in the hospital together with his 2 sisters. Then, between 9 and 10 p.m., after the sick family had taken their medications and gone to sleep, a nurse came in to tell Pastor Ignatius and the sisters that it was not convenient for the 2 children to stay in the same ward with their parents. The nurse informed the family members that she had prepared a separate room for the children and that she would take the children there while the parents remained where they were. Pastor Ignatius was delighted by what he assumed was a good gesture and even thanked her for helping his family. The nurse then asked one of the pastor's sisters to take the last child and follow her, which she did. Pastor Ignatius followed them to the nurse's room and sat down, leaving his second sister and his brother's first child in the same room with the parents. After a while, the nurse returned to the ward where Barnabas and his wife were staying and then called out the remaining sister and Barnabas's first son. All of them then went out to stay with the pastor in the nurse's room, leaving Barnabas and his wife alone in the ward. As time passed, Pastor Ignatius recalled what his sister had told him earlier in the day, and immediately he rose and rushed to his brother's room, where he made a very shocking discovery. The pastor saw the nurse allegedly removing the oxygen mask from his brother's wife's nose and then putting something inside her mouth. He shouted immediately and then asked the nurse what she was doing. The pastor rushed to his brother's wife and shook her, but she was not responding. It became clear to him that she was already gone. Pastor Ignatius then called the police that night, and when they arrived, they said they would arrest the nurse at that instance, but they would return the following morning to go and arrest the man who had threatened to kill his brother and wipe out his family. The police arrested the nurse, and they made the terrible mistake of following them to the station. Sadly, before they could return from the police station to the hospital that night, his brother Barnabas, who was already recovering, and his youngest son Victor, who was already playing, had all died. The only surviving member of the family was the couple's first son, Marvellous, who had been taken by another patient in the ward to her own hospital bed. Losing 3 out of the remaining 4 family members he had come to see left Pastor Ignatius in total shock and confusion. According to him, at that point, all he could think about was saving the only surviving member of his brother's family. In the early hours of that Monday morning, he carried the only surviving son to a teaching hospital in Enugu, but unfortunately, there was no doctor at the emergency room to attend to them. He was then advised to take the child to the Niger Foundation Specialist Hospital, which he did. At Niger Foundation Specialist Hospital, a thorough medical investigation was conducted, after which a series of medications was prescribed. The boy started taking the prescribed medication, but on the following day, they were referred to the University of Nigeria Teaching Hospital so as to carry out further diagnostics. The police later arrested the principal suspect and then brought him to the State Criminal Investigation Department. However, the Ikem Police Division, where the nurse was held, had already released her from custody. When the State CID ordered the Ikem Division to provide the nurse, she showed up the following day, together with her husband and the doctor who owned the hospital. Pastor Ignatius revealed that the owner of the hospital asked him not to make a case out of the matter and that he should allow the dead to rest. The pastor made it clear that his brother's soul and those of his family members will not rest without justice. He's calling for justice for his brother, his wife, and their 3 children. He appealed to the Enugu state government to ensure that justice is served. This is a particularly disturbing case, and what makes it even more painful is that justice may never be served, since it involves an alleged case of food poisoning. A lot of people have been poisoned to death in Nigeria, and oftentimes they just get buried and the family tries their best to move on. It is usually very difficult to prosecute these kinds of cases in Nigeria, and the challenge seems to persist year after year. Nobody knows how the alleged poison was introduced into the family's food, but the only good thing is that the principal suspect had openly threatened to harm the family. He had also shown up in the hospital, even though he didn't have any patients receiving treatment in the facility. The suspect clearly had a motive to harm Barnabas or carry out his gruesome threat, and if the Nigerian police do their magic on him and eventually get him to confess to the crime, Barnabas and his family might just get the justice they truly deserve. This was just so tragic. What do you think about the case? Have you ever seen or heard of anyone in Nigeria who was convicted of poisoning someone to death? Do you think the nurse may have had a hand in the tragedy that occurred in the hospital that Sunday night? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and please like this video, share it, and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Thank you very much for watching, and please stay safe.